LiSTNR production.
Hello, Merry Christmas to those who celebrate and welcome to the Briefing's Best of Summer series. My name is Sacha Barbour Gatt and we are bringing back some of your favourite deep dives from the last 12 months to celebrate summer. And today we are talking the new guard of female pop music and revisiting my deep dive with music aficionado Nic Kelly from July.
What we're seeing right now is the new guard coming through, and the big three that we're talking about a lot in the last 6 months are Sabrina Carpenter, Chappell Roan, Charlie XCX.
So without further ado, let's get into it. It is Wednesday, the 25th of December. You might be celebrating Brat Summer.
Yeah, 360. When you're in the mirror, do you know what you see? When you're in the mirror, you're just looking at me.
Or singing along to the light sounding but heavy meaning words of Chappell Roan. Or maybe you're sipping that espresso with Sabrina Carpenter.
You can see, baby, I know that's that me espresso.
Either way, the charts don't lie. Intense and complex female-made and focused pop is having a renaissance. But the success isn't universal for everyone. Katy Perry, once one of the darlings of early 2010s pop, has had a massive flop with her latest single, Woman's World. The accompanying music video is the second most disliked video on YouTube of the year so far, while fellow bubblegum pop artist Jojo Siwa has the most thumbs down of any vid in 2024 for her song Karma. So, with all that said, what is the key ingredient for being a successful female pop star in 2024? And what does it tell us about the future of pop? Nic Kelly is a man who knows. He hosts the hot hits on the Hit Network and LiSTNR, and he spends a lot of time listening to and thinking about the music we're hearing on our airwaves. Nic, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing today. Is female pop going through a renaissance right now?
Yeah, it is. It's going through, I think, more of an evolution than a renaissance. I think the new guard, the new generation of pop stars is what we're seeing at the moment. I grew up in a time where Katy Perry, Rihanna, Lady Gaga were kind of the big three pop stars who obviously are still household names to this day. I think what we're seeing right now is the next generation from that. I think it happens probably every 15 to 20 years rather than every kind of 10. It kind of comes with, a new age group coming through and discovering what they like. And I think what we're seeing right now is the new guard coming through. And, the big three that we're talking about a lot in the last 6 months are Sabrina Carpenter, Chappell Roan, Charlie XCX. They're artists who have been making music for a very, very long time. And now there's just kind of this perfect storm of where pop sits in the zeitgeist of global culture. The type of pop music they're making is reaching the masses.
Yeah, the themes of female-led pop music are often and have been for a long time around like girlhood and feminism and, that kind of feel-good attitude to stuff. What are we seeing out of the pop girlies at the moment that's different to, those early 2000s days?
Well, it's a much more nuanced kind of conversation they're having in these songs, and it's a much more confessional style of pop music. I think what's important to understand is the context of 15 years ago. All of these pop songs, if you look at the credits, are written by 5 or 6 men, sort of normally, 30s and 40s men. And maybe the artist was involved in the writing as well. And it's not to discredit those artists. It's just the culture of how music was made in the 2000s is it would be written in a kind of camp environment and then pitched to these different artists. Whereas the way that music is being written now comes from the artists themselves. And I think it also goes down to, the personality behind the pop star, which I don't think it was as much about 15 years ago, with the exception of maybe a Gaga. But what you see with these artists is it starts with their heart and it starts with their lived experience. I think someone like Chappell Roan, who we can discuss at much length, is a particular type with that because she really is a roots to riches kind of story. She really started, playing to 10, 12 people for years on end and then has gradually grown and has an incredible, interesting lived experience. She's from Middle America. She grew up queer, but in a conservative environment. And those stories are much more nuanced than the stories that we had from pop stars 15 years ago. You add to that, her connection to the queer community and the drag community, who have obviously been cultural borders for a long time for people. And, you know, queer fans are such an important part of so many artists and so many of the biggest artists that we know. You know, the Kylies, the Mariahs, you know, thank their queer audiences for being the kind of ones that are always there for them. And I think Chappell's had that as well as a queer artist herself. It is just authentic storytelling and excellent songwriting that is cutting through. And I think that's been the thing for me as a pop fan and a pop kind of critic for the last 15 years. It really, at the end of the day, comes back to excellent songs that connect with people. You know, you can dress it up in all this stuff. You can do these stunts. You can do performances on TV shows. But if the song is not incredible and the writing's not incredible and the way that it's structured and the way that it sounds isn't incredible, none of the other stuff is worth it. And I think that she got the songwriting right first and the rest has all just fallen into place nicely for her.
Do you think that's because we're getting, and you know, this is kind of getting existential a little bit, but are we getting better at talking about things that matter? We're not trying to put a sheen on things, you know, we're not trying to act like everything's perfect. Our pop stars and, you know, even celebrities we want to see behind the veil. Do you think that's playing a part in, you know, the bold songwriting choices of these current pop stars?
100%. I think people have much bigger bullshit detectors than they used to as pop fans. And I think a lot of it has to do with where we're at culturally at the moment as well. I mean, the big thing that I think people will know about the way that we kind of turned storytelling around was during the pandemic, how everything became a lot more lo-fi. You know, interviews like the one we're doing today would be done on Zoom with kind of grainier footage and less quality microphones, and it was acceptable. So I feel like the veil and the sheen of a pop star that we had 15 years ago kind of got let go really quickly about 4 or 5 years ago. And I think what you're seeing now is a flow-on effect of that because we allow a lot more authenticity and we allow things to be done without that kind of shine and sheen and the perfect outfits. And there's still elements of that. I mean, fashion's still an important part of music, but it's not as critical as it once was, and the $1 million budgets for music videos are not as critical. It's more story-led than it has been before. I think Charlie XCX is an example of that. These songs are so story-driven. Not many of them were out before the album. It didn't follow a traditional rollout where you'd have a couple of singles before the album comes out that you'd push to radio. And, you know, I think we're expecting and accepting things being done in a more authentic and sometimes more lo-fi style, you know, full stop. And then when it comes to the music, I think we expect that from music right now to be a lot more nuanced and a lot more, I want to say chill. I don't know if that's the right word, but in some ways we're just allowing things to be as they are rather than packaged into something that we can connect to.
Well, let's talk nuance. Katy Perry's Woman's World, with some very interesting lyrics, has flopped on the charts. The numbers came out over the weekend. Explain to us why you think it's flopped and why, you know, someone like Katy Perry, whether you like her or don't, everyone knows who she is. She was an extremely successful female pop artist. Why is this latest release falling so flat?
I think the context of her last album is also really important to know that also was not a commercial success at all. It had one mildly successful single on it. The rest were not very successful chart-wise and also critically quite panned as well. I think it's a tough one with Katy, and particularly with this single, because she has come out after the release of it and said that it's all meant to be a joke and that it's all satirical and it's sort of these traditional sort of feminism 2.0 kind of themes of empowerment and you go girl that don't stack up anymore. And I think these artists that are having success right now are looking at feminism through a different lens and looking at girlhood, as you mentioned, through a different lens, whereas it feels like Katy's stuck back in the 2008 understanding of that, where it's like women are cool and we can do things really well, just like the men can. She says that that is meant to be the case, that it's meant to be satirical. There are some leaks of songs that are coming from the album that actually sound quite good and much more back to kind of what you'd expect from a 2024 pop star. But I think it's a tough one for Katy. You know, her biggest success was between 2007 and 2012 when that sort of last guard of pop stars was coming through. And I don't think anyone from that era can really come back at the moment and make the sort of cultural connection that these artists are making. And I also think when you're at the level of fame that Katy's been at for more than a decade now, it is hard to kind of detach yourself from that and move into this more modern understanding of what we expect from a pop musician. So I think that's part of it. I struggle with it because I think the song is objectively good. I think it's an objectively good four-to-the-floor pop song. It's just a bit too ridiculous to connect to people on a genuine level.
Yeah, and especially in the current landscape where you have these amazing artists writing incredible songs themselves that cut through and really resonate with the audience. It felt very flat and it completely missed the mark. Speaking of missing the mark, Jojo Siwa, we've got to talk about her as well. You've actually interviewed her. I'm fascinated to know what that was like. But, her video for Karma, which was supposed to be her Miley Cyrus bangers moment coming out with this single and breaking that bubblegum pop image, it's actually the most disliked video on YouTube this year. Where does Jojo sit on the spectrum when it comes to female pop artists in 2024? Is she going to be the next, Sabrina Carpenter or Chappell Roan or Charlie XCX, or is she going more the way of Katy Perry and potentially just flopping?
I don't think she's going either of those ways. I think she's in a really interesting lane, and I think it's a tough one for an artist who has grown up as a celebrity more than an artist. The making music thing, when you've started out in the kids bop kind of space, making children's music, but that only being basically an income stream rather than a creative outlet. That was something that was attached to her work on Dance Moms and her work as a sort of celebrity. It's hard to make people convinced that you are a genuine artist, and obviously Miley is the blueprint for that, and she's literally tried to follow that. The writers behind Miley's first kind of big hit, We Can't Stop, which was her first kind of adult single, are the writers behind this song, and it was written in kind of the same world. So she's clearly trying to follow that blueprint, but as a personality, she is so much more brash and she is so much more ridiculous and absurd. And I think it's going to be a really tough one to get her to be convincing as an artist. When I interviewed her around the release of Karma, it was just after Saturday Night Live had done a pretty rude sketch about her, and I found her incredibly authentic, and I think that the life that she has lived so far in her very few years on this planet has been really unique and absurd, and no one's kind of lived a life like that. And I found her quite endearing in talking about it and the way that she processes emotions. I think she probably has a little bit of a fame. She's so used to fame that trying to provoke something that makes you talked about and makes you mentioned. In that Saturday Night Live performance I mentioned, she was happy that they did it because she's happy to be talked about, is what she said, that she's just happy to be in the conversation. She's happy to be the conversation rather than be boring and do things the traditional way. But I don't think the kind of music she's making, I don't think the kind of person she is, at least in the short term, is going to have any kind of like commercial success on the charts as an artist. I think she's going to kind of be more of a celebrity and more of a culture moment rather than a musician that has that kind of musical success on the charts.
Yeah, she feels like a TikTok trend. That's where Jojo Siwa kind of sits, I think, in the cultural zeitgeist at this point. You talked a little bit at the start about how this is the new guard of women in pop. What are we going to be seeing then going forward? Can we expect this style, this approach to popular music to continue for the next decade, or are we going to see some new trends start to emerge in the next year or so?
So I think a big part of where music's going is the globalization of it and how an artist from anywhere in the world can break globally. And you've got things like TikTok to thank for that, despite, artists having differing opinions on what it means for them. But it does mean that you can access a global audience quite quickly. And so I think with that, there are a number of songs on the charts that don't sound like songs that we've had before. Sounds like Afro beats, which originated in Africa. It's a kind of half pop, a bit of hip hop and a little bit of African music kind of all blended into one. Songs like Calm Down by Selena Gomez and an artist named Rema from Nigeria went to number one in the US. And I think you're going to see more global sounds like that. I think maybe a little bit of that Bollywood sound as well might make a reappearance after its appearance on the Pussycat Dolls' Jai Ho in 2009.
I remember it well. Great song.
A moment. And you remember it not sounding like anything you'd heard before. And I think that's going to be the thing. And I think, like I said with Chappell Roan, authentic, good songwriting, excellent songs that are addictive on the first listen is what's going to drive music to the front, and real artists behind it. Gone are the days where you can manufacture a hit and manufacture a star. That's out the window now. Authenticity is the only thing working because people's BS radars are so high now. They're only looking for people that feel like them and look like them. And that's why it's so exciting to see this next group of artists coming through.
Nic Kelly, you know your shit. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk us through, what did you call it? The evolution of female pop we're going through at the moment. Love to hear about it.
It's an exciting time. Thanks, Sash.
That was my chat with music guru Nic Kelly from July there. And that is all for this episode of The Briefing's Best of Summer series. Thank you for listening. If you're bored today, it's Christmas Day, maybe you need to avoid the family for a little bit, or you want to have a scroll in between Chrissy lunch and dessert, why not check out our YouTube channel? We put up a bunch of really cool stuff on there. Search us LiSTNR Newsroom. We're also, of course, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. We'll be back in your feed with another Best of ep from 6 a.m. tomorrow. See you then.
LiSTNR.